fight against pollution. And some people will be very, very happy to hear that Beyoncé is releasing another country album. And for some people, that will give them hope, something to look forward to. But not everyone. Because the most authentic hope deals with more than just one thing. It brings healing and change to broader structures and systems and culture. Not everyone believes that the world needs another Beyoncé country album. Some of us do. But the third thing that hope gives us, that hope needs to be, is guaranteed. Films like The Greatest Showman begin with a song about 1 million dreams I'm going to make. But then the film climaxes with the admission that not even the shine of 1,000 spotlights would ever be enough to satisfy us. There's always something more to have. And everything we have can sometimes feel like it can go in a moment. And we only have so much time. If this life is all there is, that if we're meant to make the most of this life, then some of us get outrageously lucky, and some of us don't. And is that it? If hope is no more than a wish or a feeling or an expectation that something might happen, then the potential for hopelessness is around every corner. Why is it that sometimes as people grow older, their hope for the world to become better fades away? But thankfully, this is not where we're going to end this morning. Easter has something to say about hope. And the story I want to tell you in a moment is a story that will make you want to carry yourself lighter. It will give you a reason to celebrate hope. But it begins in the least likely place that you'll find hope, in a graveyard. In the Harry Potter books, on the tombstone of Harry's parents is this quote: "The last enemy to be defeated is death." If you imagine that everything that comes against you in life is an enemy, what's the worst one? Death. Now imagine life where all the enemies are defeated, even the worst one. Everything is put right. So much so that everything that ruins our world is no more. Well, that line from Harry Potter is actually a quote from one of the earliest pieces of Christian writing that we have, saying that Jesus has been raised from the dead. A few Easters ago, me and my mum and dad went to Dublin. We were going over to Galway to see some family friends, and we stopped in Dublin on the way, and we went to Chester Beatty Library, where you can find this, which is the earliest copy we have of a letter of someone saying that they have seen Jesus alive, and not just them, but many others as well. And what this means is that we can have hope if it's true. One of my favorite comedians, Eddie Izzard, who in an interview once said this: "I have a very strong sense that we are only on this planet for a short length of time. Religious people might think it goes on after death. My feeling is that if that is the case, it would be nice if just one person came back and let us know that it was all fine, all confirmed. Of all the billions of people who've died, if just one of them could come through the clouds and say, you know, it's me, it's brilliant, there's a really good spa, that would be great." Well, I don't have any news on a spa, but that is the claim that Christians are making. That there is a hope, because we know that Jesus has come through death and through the other side. Which means that there is a hope that is honest about the worst enemies of life, broad enough to encompass everything that's wrong with the world, and so guaranteed that you can call it eternal. But that's not how people felt when Jesus died, when he was placed in a tomb. Jesus was a man who said remarkable things, controversial things at times, revolutionary things. The people who met him found that they had found someone so approachable, so dignifying, so loving. A person who not just claimed to be a teacher about God, but claimed to be the one responsible for this universe existing in the first place, entering into our world. And that led to his scandalous death after a fraudulent trial and a brutal torture. To be stripped naked, to be tortured, to be crucified on a Roman cross, was the worst thing, the worst fate. Its purpose, that form of execution, was to disregard the worst criminals as though they were less than human. Clearly, Jesus didn't believe he was making this up. He was no liar, otherwise he'd never let it get so out of hand. But whatever you make of Jesus, seeing him on the cross, you would have seen him and thought, this is a joke. And honestly, it's a surprise that any of us have heard of him. But one of the early followers of Jesus, his friend and an eyewitness of these things, wrote down what happened next. So let me read you the story of their discovery. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been rolled away from the entrance. She came running to Simon Peter and to the other disciple, the one Jesus loved, and said, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they've put him." Now, Jesus' followers, his friends, weren't superstitious people. They first wondered, has someone stolen the body? So they went to look. The last 2 days since Jesus' crucifixion were filled with doubt and confusion. And if grave robbers had gone in and stolen the body, then they would expect that the linen and the expensive clothes would have been gone as well. So Peter and the other disciples started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. I love that this has been written down for 2,000 years, that boast that he was the faster one of the two. He bent over and looked in at the strips of linen lying there, but he did not go in. Then Simon Peter came along behind him and went straight in. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple who had reached the tomb first also went inside. He saw and believed. They still did not understand from the scriptures that Jesus had to rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to where they were staying. But what did Mary think? Mary, who was the one who told them about this. Now Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb, and she saw 2 angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They have taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they've put him." Can you imagine going to visit a loved one's grave and it's been ruined? How distraught you would be. And at this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there. But she did not realize it was Jesus. He asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it that you're looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned towards him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, "I have seen the Lord." And she told them that he had said these things to her. They'd been to the empty tomb. Mary has heard this man say her name and recognizes him as Jesus. But could it be that Mary is dreaming? That through her grief, this might be a hallucination, wishful thinking? Well, on the evening of that first day of the week, when the disciples were together, with the doors locked for fear of the Jewish leaders, they were scared because they had persecuted Jesus, led him on a trial, and crucified him. What could they do to them? So when they were together with doors locked for fear of the Jewish leaders, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." After he said this, he showed them his hands and his side. And the disciples were overjoyed when they saw the Lord. Now Thomas, also known as Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hand, and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." Now, a week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." And Thomas said to him, "My Lord and my God." Then Jesus told him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe." Now what's going on here is not that Jesus was telling off Thomas. He was not telling Thomas that you need to believe without evidence. Jesus has come to him and said, "You have said you won't believe until you see this. Here I am." He's presented the evidence to him. What Jesus is saying is that, Thomas, you have seen me alive. But let me tell you, there are going to be many, many more who had become persuaded that this is true. You see, the unique claim of Christianity that Jesus rose from the dead is not the private opinion of a few people, but a historical claim. John and the others wouldn't claim it as history that can be fact-checked if they had made it up or weren't convinced. They listed people that in the first few years, anybody could have spoken to them and say, "Did it really happen this way?" No one would say that the tomb was empty unless it really was. It was public. Anybody could have gone to check, and Christianity wouldn't have even begun. And every theory that says that someone must have stolen the body has actually been dismissed by most serious historians, because no one wanted the news to spread. No one wanted the news to spread, so whoever had the body had the motive to present it. Named individuals claimed to see Jesus alive who could verify their claims, and even crowds of up to 500 people at a time, all recorded in historical accounts, like the letter I showed you earlier. These were named people who could have been interviewed. And no psychologist would say that this was hallucination, because a hallucination is a private showing. You can't project it onto a big screen for lots of us to watch. And even the writers of these accounts show us that they needed to be convinced themselves. Jesus' friend Mary assumed that the body had been stolen until she met Jesus. And even the disciples didn't believe the women until they saw the empty tomb. And Thomas didn't believe until he stuck his fingers in Jesus' scars. And each one of them had nothing to gain by sharing this. But most of them lost their lives because they believed it was true. But also being crucified made you so shameful to associate with that it was better that your name was forgotten for all of history, which is why we have so few records of named people who were crucified. So I don't think it's an overstatement to say, if Jesus hadn't been raised from the dead, none of us here would have heard of him. It's an understatement to say that Jesus rising from the dead is front page news. It's unprecedented. And so it's understandable if you are here and you have big questions about this and doubts. Now here's the thing. I believe that this is true. And I believe that this means that we can be hopeful. And the evidence lies open before us in history. But let me tell you 3 reasons why I believe that this means we can be hopeful. It means that I can be certain that this hope is honest about what is wrong in life. There's no ignoring of suffering, no cheap fixes, no cliche catchphrases or cartoons or memes to throw around to comfort us when we cry out for hope. Instead, we see someone who actually suffers, who dies, who goes through the worst of life like us and goes through it to the other side of death. If you go to the Tate Modern Arts Museum in London, there's a statue by the artist Anthony Gormley. And it's a statue that looks like any man, and it's actually a plaster mold of his body. But the pierced hands, pierced feet, and pierced side, and outstretched arms are obviously displaying Jesus. It looks like anybody, and it looks like Jesus. And that is exactly the point of Jesus' death. Jesus' death on the cross was anyone. He was humanity. He experienced the worst of human pain. He knows what it is to suffer. But more than that, Jesus suffers the consequence of every single offense that we have committed against him and the world that he has made. Every action we regret, every pain that we've inflicted on another, no matter how big or small, every damage done to others or to ourselves, he takes all of it onto himself. Everything that we call sin, onto himself. The Christian story is that our choices to live as though God doesn't matter have disconnected us from the one who gives life. And our sin is like a debt that must be paid. And it was. On the cross, he pays for everything that disconnects us from God so that forgiveness can be possible, so that you can know life with him. A life that neither suffering nor death can ever take away. Secondly, this hope is broad enough to include everyone who says yes to it. There is no one in this room or in this world for whom this news is irrelevant. None of our lives are untouched by the reality of time, that we only have so much. And so often our lives are built around wanting to make the most of now, the here and now. And honestly, death is not something that anyone really wants to talk about until they have to. Perhaps even coming this Sunday and hearing about someone rising from the dead is uncomfortable. Because as Shakespeare said it in Hamlet, death is an undiscovered country, something covered in shadow. No one we know has been there and come back to tell us what it's like. Except the resurrection of Jesus means that's not true. The door is wide open. And each one of us will come to meet Jesus at the end of our lives. Will he welcome us in? Well, Jesus promised a coming life where every joy, every party you've ever been to, every refreshing drink on a hot summer's day, every good story that's made you laugh or cry, every wedding you've ever been to celebrate with friends, all of that is pointing toward, is a taste of what is to come. The world that we were made to belong to, this world as it was always meant to be, where Elmo could ask, how's everyone doing? And we say, it's great. A moment in our future where everything will be the way it was meant to be. And you can't get broader than that. And the message is loud and clear. If you meet Jesus, he says life can only be found in relationship to the one true God that he reveals. So if we're to truly live, it has to be life with him. And that's why Jesus chose the cross. His death makes that possible. He dies so that life can be ours forever. And because we have cut ourselves off from the one who gives life, he himself dies our death. And because he is risen, because death couldn't hold him, because he's the one who gives life, he then offers us life. And lastly, this hope means that we can be certain that it is guaranteed. When Jesus rose from the dead, his followers were convinced he must be who he says he is. This is not a joke. We thought it was all over when we saw him hanging on the cross, when we put him in the tomb. But he really is who he says he is. And gosh, we have missed it. We thought he was going to bring hope in this way. Who could have imagined that he would deal with the biggest thing of all, death itself? Seeing him crucified, they wondered whether he was a fraud and whether they had wasted their life. But seeing him risen, just as he said he would, he is everything he said he is. the one who would save humanity. He is the Son of God. He is the one who made us, the one who has come to seek and save everything that's lost, to put things back the way they were meant to be, who would give his life as a ransom for many, that his death was not an accident. It wasn't a defeat. It was exactly what he intended to happen. And that's how he came to save. And for them, when they saw him alive, it all clicked. And they realized this is true. There is a life that he gives that can be never taken away. And it's yours if you'll have it. As we heard earlier, hope, victory, restoration is yours. Hopelessness, worthlessness, and despair can be left at the cross. And perhaps, no matter where you are today, it'd be right to reflect. Do I think this claim about Jesus is more likely to be true or untrue? Because for every person that Jesus encountered, they had to come to a decision themselves. There was no forcing. And Jesus would lead people to everything that they needed to hear. But this is something that's personal that each one of us have to think about. I think everyone is somewhere on a scale between 0 and 10. 0 being, I'll never believe this, and 10 being, I'll never doubt it. Let me tell you, I've never met a single person who is a 0, and I've never met a Christian who is a 10. And no Christian, no believer in Jesus I've met would say that they're consistently even a 9 either. Most somewhere between a 6 and an 8. And so, if you're somewhere near a 5, perhaps this morning it'd be worth considering, maybe I'm actually not that far off. And so I want to put it to you. Do you know what you would need to look into to go further on that scale? As a church, we love helping people to investigate this for themselves, to make up their own minds, to walk with people as they question. What questions do you have about this? If you're around a 5, do you have any reason to not accept Jesus' offer for you to be with him forever? You see, you and I might have questions. And let me tell you, following Jesus has given me way more questions than in the years before I really understood what his offer was. Christianity means that you have more questions, not just answers, and that's the thrill of it. It's the constant learning, the constant discovery, the constant awe and wonder as you realize how big this hope really is. But we find that we can trust him with our questions. Where are you on that scale? And what would it look like if you were one further along? For some of you in this room, maybe you've appreciated the chance to look into and explore what Christians believe a bit more. And I'm really glad you came. We'd love to see you again. And for others, you know that you have questions. Can I say, please don't ignore those. Please don't think that any question is too big, too controversial, too silly to ask, or too small. We'd love to chat. Because I genuinely believe that if this is not true, then it is of no importance. And I'm really sorry for taking up some of your time when you could have booked somewhere else. And if this is not true, then it does mean that what we've been saying about God being here, that's not true. This is just a really, really early time to have a gig. But if this is true, then it's the most important thing in the world, isn't it? Because if someone had died and risen again, and if that person is the one who made the world, and he did it to save you so that you could be with him forever, wouldn't you want to know? Wouldn't it mean that this is really true, that God really is with us? But for some of you in this room, you know that even if you have questions, you could believe this, and you could say so today. For some of you in the room, maybe the songs we were singing hit home in a way, or they resonated with you. For others, it might be this is not your kind of genre of music at all. That's fine. Maybe you've come in and you've met some wonderful people, or come in trying to meet as few people as possible, just to look in. But if you'd say that something today has resonated with you, that even if you have questions, you could say you believe this, I'd love to pray a prayer. Now, if this isn't for you, please just listen in to these words. But if this is you, maybe silently in your own heads or in your heart, you might want to just echo this. And I'll say the word amen at the end, which is a fancy word for saying I agree. And maybe you can say that silently. But let me pray. And if that isn't you at this moment, maybe think about those questions I asked earlier. Jesus, if you are alive, it means that we can have hope. I admit that when I look at the world, I sometimes think that there couldn't be any hope. But if I look at you, I believe that not even death can squash this hope. Jesus, I am sorry that I have lived life without reference to you, to live as though you don't matter to me. And I thank you that you forgive me. I believe that as we've heard this morning, when you died on the cross, you died to pay for all of those things that I've done wrong, so that I can have forgiveness, so that it can be wiped away. And Jesus, I commit to following you, to asking my questions, to trying to learn what it means to live as though you are alive. Would you help me? Amen. If that is you, maybe it might be a good idea for you to tell someone in the church, maybe someone you're sat with, someone you know, or you can find any person who's been up the front. We're going to carry on singing and celebrating now if the band would like to come back up. But as I do, I would love to extend that invitation again. As a church, we love to help people wrestle through their questions. All kinds of people come through our doors from all kinds of countries and backgrounds, and whether they've lived in Portsmouth a day or they were born in St. Mary's. And we love helping people find answers to their questions. So I'd love to say, please come back. If you would say, I'm not quite there, but I am interested, then please come next Sunday. We'd love to see you. I think one of the best things is being able to see what it really means for Christians to live out this life. And the best way to do that is to meet together on a Sunday morning, to sing some more songs, to have some tea and coffee afterwards and get to know people. But we're going to sing now. We're going to celebrate the fact that Jesus has been raised from the dead. So why don't we stand as we sing these next few songs?
We're going to sing two songs. This first one speaks of actually where our hope is found, as Fearghal was saying. The second one is a big celebration of